on and seized an unarmed American merchant ship in the Gulf of Thailand. The container cargo ship Mayaguez, with a crew of 39 Americans, was reportedly forced into the Cambodian port of Kampong Som. The condition of the crew is unknown. The Mayaguez, owned by the Sea Land Corporation of New Jersey, was en route from Hong Kong to Thailand when it was seized early this morning, Washington time. In a similar incident a few days ago, the Cambodians also captured a Panamanian ship on the high seas, then later released it. At the White House, President Ford called today's seizure an act of piracy and warned of serious consequences unless the Mayaguez is released immediately. White House correspondent Tom Gerald has details.
The White House is not treating this incident or characterizing it yet as a major crisis. The official language is strong, and the message conveyed by the president's spokesman indicates that unless the ship is released, there will be a further response.
The president has met with the National Security Council. He considers this seizure to be an act of piracy. He has instructed the State Department to demand the immediate release of the ship. Failure to do so would have the most serious consequences.
The American ship was traveling from Hong Kong to Thailand when it sent out a Mayday emergency radio signal, which was picked up in Indonesia. It was located 60 miles off the coast of Cambodia, but only 8 miles off a small rock island in the Gulf of Thailand. The island is claimed by both Cambodia and South Vietnam. American officials contend the ship was in international waters. Before radio contact was lost, the Mayaguez reported it was fired upon and boarded by armed forces from a Cambodian gunboat. There were no injuries reported, and the ship is believed to have been taken to the Cambodian port of Kampong Som. The ship, with its 39-man American crew, is believed to have been carrying a military cargo. A White House spokesman gives a flat no when asked if this was a spy ship. They refuse to elaborate on the serious consequences the president is threatening or to talk about a possible U.S. military response. They clearly hope the strong language of the president will get the ship freed, but are concerned over having to deal with the new rebel government in Cambodia. There are no direct diplomatic channels. The new Khmer Rouge leadership is a mystery to U.S. officials. One official puts it simply, "We don't know what we're dealing with." Tom Gerald, ABC News at the White House.
This is Frank Tomlinson at the Pentagon. With the capture of the freighter Mayaguez, the topic of conversation here is what can be done. There is a congressional mandate against use of troops or aircraft in Southeast Asia. And as for now, the only answer to a Pentagon question is no comment. But this much is known. Many of the ships that took part in the evacuation of Saigon are now in or near the Subic Bay Navy base in the Philippines. There is virtually no American naval power near Cambodia. One source says, though, the aircraft carrier Coral Sea is south of what he calls the area of interest, but he won't say how far south. There's still a considerable American presence across the Cambodian border in Thailand with 27,000 troops and some 200 fighters and bombers plus helicopters. A military source says a helicopter raid into Cambodia is physically possible and then quickly adds, but what good would that do? Reportedly, some ships of the 7th Fleet have been ordered to move westward, but with specific instructions to take no action whatever. As one military source said, the only thing we can do right now is complain a lot. Frank Tomlinson, ABC News, the Pentagon.
This is Ted Koppel in St. Louis. Secretary Kissinger arrived here in St. Louis in order to make a speech tonight, but he had nothing to say to waiting newsmen on the subject that is foremost on everyone's mind. It is quite possible, in fact, that neither Kissinger nor anyone else in the administration will have anything to add for the next couple of days to the statement released by the White House this afternoon. The problem now is one of communication with the new Cambodian government. The U.S. protest has apparently been routed through third countries, and the only ones represented now in Phnom Penh are the People's Republic of China, North Vietnam, and North Korea. Senior U.S. officials are hinting at possible military action. We will not, one of them told me, accept detention of this ship. But no direct action is expected for the next couple of days. In other words, the time that will be necessary for messages to be exchanged between Washington and Phnom Penh. This is Ted Koppel, ABC News, with the Secretary of State in St. Louis.
Congressional reaction to the news that Cambodia had seized the U.S. ship varied from extreme caution to extreme outrage, with one call for immediate bombing. ABC's David Garcia samples the varied reaction.
Some senators had not even heard of the seizure and had to take time to read news dispatches of the incident. Most senators said the U.S. should react with patience.
If we have to use forces, there's plenty of time for that. But let's use reason first. Be calm. Don't get too jumpy. I can't imagine that the Cambodian Navy is going to throw the fear of God into anybody. What they have for a Navy would make a good flotilla on Lake Calhoun in Minnesota.
But conservative James Buckley of New York wants no part of diplomacy.
This is an act of piracy, nothing more, nothing less, and there's only one kind of answer that'll be understood and keep this sort of thing from happening to the future, and that is immediate retaliation. So I've recommended that the President order an immediate clinical airstrike against appropriate targets, and then maybe you won't have this kind of harassment in the future.
But Buckley's appeal for immediate retaliation was in the minority. Most senators want to leave it up to President Ford. As Republican leader Hugh Scott put it, Congress is no place to deal with pirates. David Garcia, ABC News, Capitol Hill.
Retired Navy Commander Lloyd Booker, whose spy ship Pueblo was captured by North Korea in January of 1968, says President Ford should immediately take swift and positive action to secure the release of the Mayaguez. Booker says if any of the crew members are harmed, President Ford should order immediate retaliatory action.
This American ship, the container ship Mayaguez, today was fired on, boarded, and seized by a Cambodian government and a gunboat, and its crew of 40 Americans has apparently been taken prisoner. The White House says the ship was captured by the Cambodian gunboat on the high seas and described the act as piracy. The Mayaguez is now reported to be in the Cambodian harbor of Kampong Som after a journey of 60 miles across the Gulf of Thailand. No one knows why the ship was seized, only that the White House says it was a Cambodian boat which did it. Here's more from Tom Brokaw.
President Ford first learned of the incident from his daily intelligence briefing when he awoke early this morning. At noon Washington time, the President gathered the National Security Council at the White House for a 45-minute discussion, and a short time later, Presidential Press Secretary Ron Nessen broke the news with a brief statement.
We have been informed that a Cambodian naval vessel has seized an American merchant ship on the high seas and forced it to the port of Kampong Som. The President has met with the National Security Council. He considers this seizure to be an act of piracy. He has instructed the State Department to demand the immediate release of the ship. Failure to do so would have the most serious consequences.
Despite the strong language in that statement, there was not an era of crisis at the White House this evening. Secretary Kissinger went to St. Louis for a speech, and no other meetings of the National Security Council were scheduled. The White House flatly denied that the American ship involved was working on a spy mission, and at the same time, spokesmen also refused to describe the nature of contacts the State Department is attempting to make with the new Cambodian government. President Ford consulted with only a few congressional leaders and then only briefly. In Congress, reaction to the incident was mixed.
I think we've learned some lessons about jumping at the ultimate recourse, namely armed force. Stop, look, and listen. If we have to use forces, there's plenty of time for that.
If they fail to release it, then we have to go after it.
This is an act of piracy, nothing more, nothing less, and there's only one kind of answer that will be understood and keep this sort of thing from happening to the future, and that is immediate retaliation. So I've recommended that the President order an immediate clinical airstrike against appropriate targets, and then maybe you won't have this kind of harassment in the future.
White House spokesman refused to speculate on the President's course of action if the Cambodians do refuse to give up the ship. When pressed for an assessment of the current situation, Press Secretary Nessen said, "I wouldn't characterize it as grave or serious," and he then referred reporters to language in the statement, which speaks of serious consequences, but nothing specific. Tom Brokaw, NBC News, Washington.
The Mayaguez is owned by the Sealand Corporation based in New Jersey. The firm said today that the cargo carried in containers was valued at $1.33 million, and that part of the cargo is 77 containers with military cargo, including munitions. There's no clear indication of what can be done to rescue the 40 Americans or the ship. There is one report that an unarmed U.S. Navy reconnaissance plane flew near the harbor today. There's another report that an American aircraft carrier and other ships are steaming toward the area just in case they're needed.
evening, the Mayaguez, an unarmed American merchant ship carrying some military cargo, was seized today by a Cambodian gunboat in the Gulf of Thailand, 60 miles off the coast of Cambodia. The American ship was forced to put in at the Cambodian port of Kampong Som. More on the story from Phil Jones at the White House.
President Ford did not learn of the incident until his routine morning briefing from the National Security Council. And it was more than 6 hours later that News Secretary Ron Nessen announced the details of the seizure and read a statement for cameras.
We have been informed that a Cambodian naval vessel has seized an American merchant ship on the high seas and forced it to the port of Kampong Som. The President has met with the National Security Council. He considers this seizure to be an act of piracy. He has instructed the State Department to demand the immediate release of the ship. Failure to do so would have the most serious consequences.
According to Nessen, the ship reported that it was being fired upon by a Cambodian gunship. There was a final Mayday message that was monitored by a radio operator in Indonesia. The radio then went dead. There were reportedly 39 or 40 Americans aboard. No word on whether there are injuries or exactly where the ship is now. The White House says flatly that it was not a spy ship and that it was in international waters. On Capitol Hill, reaction was mixed and in some cases cautious, but some talked about swift and firm retaliation.
I would say that if they fail to release it, then we ought to go after it.
How should we get the ship back?
Any way that we can.
And there's only one kind of answer that'll be understood and keep this sort of thing from happening to the future, and that is immediate retaliation. So I've recommended that the President order an immediate clinical airstrike against appropriate targets. And then maybe you won't have this kind of harassment in the future. The important thing about something like this is that it hurt, so that people know that the United States will not any longer tolerate this kind of action.
Senator, would you be against going through diplomatic channels first?
Yes.
There are many ways to correct a situation that borders upon a violation of international law before you resort to armed force. I think we've learned some lessons about jumping at the ultimate recourse, namely armed force. Stop, look, and listen.
That cautious approach seems to be President Ford's strategy. CBS News has learned that the U.S. has begun delegate negotiations, primarily through China, to retrieve the ship. China being the only country that has decent relations with the new Cambodian government. Nothing further is expected tonight, and as one high official put it, we're not going to do anything further until the dust settles on our stern warning. Phil Jones, CBS News at the White House.
Pentagon sources tell Ike Papa said U.S. Navy ships are now moving toward the Gulf of Thailand off the Cambodian coast. The sources did not say how many or what type ships. At Sealand Services Incorporated in Edison, New Jersey today, Gary Shepard got the ship company's reaction to the seizure.
Officials of Sealand refused to appear on camera, but a spokesman said the Mayaguez was carrying general container cargo. It was on a regularly scheduled trip from Hong Kong to Satahip, Thailand, he said, when the seizure took place. Sealand says it has contracts to carry American military goods in Southeast Asia, and the spokesman said there is no doubt some of the cargo was military, but he couldn't say exactly what was on board. All of the crew members were Americans. All were employed by Sealand, he said, and any suggestion that the vessel was operating under the control of the U.S. government, the Pentagon, or the CIA, he said, is ludicrous. Gary Shepard, CBS News, Edison, New Jersey.
Lloyd Booker, the captain of the U.S. spy ship Pueblo, captured by North Korean gunboats in January of 1968, said today there should be positive and swift American reaction to the seizure. Booker, now retired, said the government has got to provide leadership, quote, to prevent people from around the world twisting our tail all over the world.
And our top story this morning is the seizure of a United States merchant ship by the new Cambodian government, which so far is not saying anything about why it took the vessel. She's a container ship, the Mayaguez, and as far as is known, the ship and her 39-man crew are now in the Cambodian port of Sihanoukville, which used to be called Kampong Som. The ship is owned by a New Jersey-based company and was sailing, reportedly well out in international waters, from Hong Kong to Thailand. She's carrying what's described as mixed cargo, which the company, her owner says, could include some military hardware. It isn't at all clear yet what the United States government is going to do about all this, but there is a lot of talk in high places, including some from Secretary of State Kissinger, who was in St. Louis last night for a news conference and a speech. Chris Kelly reports.
At his news conference here, Kissinger offered no new information on the seizure and gave no hint how the United States will eventually respond to what Washington calls a hostile act.
I think that the president's statement speaks for itself. He called the action an act of piracy, and he demanded the immediate release of the American ship and crew. And he's pointed out that failure to do so could have serious consequences. We are undertaking at present diplomatic efforts to bring about this release. And until they have had their chance, we will not make any further comment. I don't think it is, this is the time for me to give a checklist of possible American responses. I think our statement has made it clear that we will not accept this and that we are insisting on the release of the ship and the crew. But what specific steps we will take, if this cannot be achieved by diplomatic means, we will have to wait.
Business and civic leaders, after meeting privately with Kissinger, quoted him as saying the U.S. would have a measured response in several days. But in his speech, Kissinger did not mention this latest crisis and spoke instead about the U.S. role in world affairs in the aftermath of Indochina defeats.
We are no longer predominant. We are inescapably a leader. Though we cannot impose our solutions, few solutions are possible without us. There is no other country so endowed to help build a better future.
This so-called visit to America's heartland was designed to drum up support for administration foreign policy that has suffered setbacks because of communist gains in Southeast Asia. But as Kissinger goes about his schedule, attention is focused on a new crisis in an area where this country no longer is the dominant force. Chris Kelly, CBS News, St. Louis.
And our top story this morning is that the Cambodian insurgents still have not said anything to the outside world about the United States merchant ship Mayaguez, a freighter which the Cambodians seized yesterday off the Cambodian coast. The ship is owned by a New Jersey-based company. She was carrying mixed cargo between Hong Kong and Thailand, and the company says some of that cargo could be military hardware. The last heard from the ship was a distress call and a message saying she was being fired on by a gunboat. The incident has brought some tough talk from the White House and Congress, and for more on that, here's Bruce Morton in Washington.
Hughes White House Press Secretary Ron Nessen says President Ford regards the seizure of the Mayaguez as an act of piracy and that a Cambodian failure promptly to release the ship and her crew would have the most serious consequences, which is the kind of language diplomats usually use to mean that they're considering the use of military force. U.S. officials concede force poses some problems, centering around how to make sure the crew is safe while the force is being used, and it's understood here that the U.S. is trying diplomacy first. The administration is working through the Chinese, since they're the only country which has any ties to the new government in Cambodia. China's envoy to this country, Huang Chen, was called to the State Department yesterday afternoon, presumably to talk about the plight of the Mayaguez. Officials are uncertain what motivated the Cambodian action: simple desire to embarrass the United States, an effort to trade the ship for airplanes flown out of Cambodia to Thailand by pilots of the former government. Nobody is sure. Officials here do emphasize that the Mayaguez is not a spy ship, but an ordinary merchantman. Phil Jones has the latest from the White House. Phil?
According to spokesman Ron Nessen, the Mayaguez was spotted about 30 miles off the Cambodian coast. U.S. military aircraft have kept around-the-clock surveillance of the ship, and these planes report that during the night, the Mayaguez was escorted by 2 Cambodian naval vessels from a point where it was originally boarded towards its present location. According to Nessen, President Ford was kept informed of developments throughout the night, and at this point, the president is up and has received his routine morning briefings from the National Security Council. The atmosphere at the White House remains very calm. Secretary of State Kissinger is out of town on a previously scheduled speaking engagement, and Nesson says there are no plans at this point to hold any special National Security Council meeting. No one at the White House is speculating, privately or publicly, but there is a possibility that the reported movement of the ship back out to the point where it was seized may be a prelude to the actual release of the ship and its crew. Bruce?
Congressional reaction has been mixed. Most of those questioned favored trying diplomatic means first. Javits of New York counseled a little patience. But New York conservative James Buckley called for immediate air and naval attacks on Cambodia. And Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Sparkman of Alabama said the U.S. should get the ship back by any means it can. If a person shoots at you, you've got a right to shoot back, Sparkman said. White House counsel Philip Buchan said he thought the president did have the authority to use force in this kind of situation. Hughes?
The Ford administration has been taking pains to play down comparisons between what's happening to the Mayaguez and what happened 7 years ago when the North Koreans seized the U.S. Navy ship Pueblo and held the crew for 11 months. The Pueblo, as you may recall, was an intelligence-gathering vessel, and its captain, as you also may recall, was Commander Lloyd Bucher. He's retired from the Navy now, and Kathleen Parker in San Diego asked him what he thinks the United States should do about this latest incident.
Well, I think that the government's responsibility is clear-cut. It is a U.S. flagship, and this means that it's a merchant ship that is registered in this country, and the government's responsibility is to protect those ships either on the high seas or in any port that they may visit in the world.
Would you advocate going in with guns?
Well, I would advocate that the president's responsibility is to give the Cambodian government an ultimatum to the effect that the ship and the crew be released within a specified period of time. If that ultimatum is not answered in a positive way, then I think that our only avenue is to go in and take the ship back and to tell the Cambodians that if they harm anybody on the ship or any of the ship's cargo, that we will extract a rather high price in return for that depredation on their part.
Would that precipitate a full-blown war?
No.
The story is NBC News correspondent Chuck Scarborough.
Good afternoon from the NBC newsroom. We have just gotten word that a U.S. aircraft has sunk 3 Cambodian boats. I read you now a statement from the Pentagon. At 8:30 p.m. yesterday evening, indication was that the Cambodians appeared to be attempting to move captured U.S. crewmen from the ship, that is the Mayaguez, from the island of Koh Tang to the mainland of Cambodia. After giving warning, U.S. aircraft began efforts to block this movement. 3 Cambodian patrol craft were destroyed in that effort. 4 others were damaged and they were immobilized. The Pentagon says the one craft did succeed in making the Cambodian mainland, reaching Kampong Som Harbor. U.S. aircraft, according to the Pentagon, had been receiving small arms fire from such boats for several hours prior to this action, and according to them, the Mayaguez is still at anchor at sea. President Ford has summoned the National Security Council to the White House later today for its 3rd meeting since the Mayaguez was captured on Monday. This has been a bulletin from the NBC Newsroom.
Is ABC News White House correspondent Tom Gerald.
The White House has just concluded a morning news briefing here on the status of the captured American ship by the Cambodians. The president's spokesman, Ron Nesson, says that he cannot say whether or not the 39 American crewmen are safe. However, Nesson warns reporters against jumping to the conclusion that the American merchant seamen were on board those 3 Cambodian gunboats which were destroyed by U.S. aircraft. Nesson says that the United States is not at a state of war with Cambodia at this time. He confirms that President Ford did indeed order the airstrikes to be taken against the Cambodians. The president's spokesman says the action was taken after some consultation, as they call it here, with congressional leaders. Basically, it sounded like a phone call to the congressional leaders advising them that action would be taken. The White House liaison office with Congress said that there were no objections expressed by senior members of Congress to the president's action. A senior White House official has told ABC's Ted Koppel that the purpose of the airstrikes was to keep anyone from either going onto or leaving the island where the American merchant ship is at anchor and where it was taken shortly after it was captured by the Cambodian gunboats. This is Tom Gerald, ABC News at the White House.
The United States is moving cautiously on several fronts today to secure the release of that American merchant ship, Mayaguez, and its American crew of 39 seized yesterday by the Cambodians. Diplomatic efforts are being made, reportedly through the People's Republic of China, which has relations with Cambodia. U.S. Marines have reportedly been put on alert in Okinawa, possibly to be sent to Thailand. A Navy reconnaissance plane flying over the ship today was fired on and hit by the Cambodians. We have a series of reports on the status of the incident, first from ABC White House correspondent Tom Gerald.
The fate of the 39-man American crew aboard the captured merchant ship became a mystery today because the White House either would not or could not explain their whereabouts. Asked if the crew was still aboard the ship or if they had been taken to shore, the president's spokesman would only say he was not able to talk about it. Overnight, the ship was located by reconnaissance aircraft. It's under guard of 2 Cambodian gunboats sitting dead in the water near the island of Koh Tang, 30 miles off the Cambodian mainland. The White House also revealed this was the 3rd incident at sea in the area in recent days. 10 days ago, a Korean freighter was fired upon. Then a Panamanian ship was seized and released. It wasn't until after the American ship was captured that an international warning to mariners was then issued. President Ford held an emergency session of his National Security Council, presumably to discuss military options to consider if diplomatic channels fail. For now, the president has ordered no military response. If he does, they say, he'll try to first consult Congress. A hint that action is contemplated came when the president took the arm of a friend from Congress leaving a meeting today and said, "I've got a tough decision to make on the ship." Tom Gerald, ABC News at the White House.
This is Frank Tomlinson at the Pentagon. It has now been confirmed that a Navy P-3 reconnaissance plane, like the one in this Defense Department photo, was hit by small arms fire while flying low passes over the freighter Mayaguez and the Cambodian gunboats in the Gulf of Siam. No one was injured, and the plane, with only minor damage, returned to Utapao, Thailand. As for now, the Defense Department is in a holding pattern to give diplomacy a chance to work, but plans are being made should diplomacy fail. Marines on Okinawa and at Subic Bay in the Philippines have been placed on alert. The aircraft carrier Coral Sea, scheduled to visit Australia, has been turned around and is headed for the Gulf of Siam. So far, no Marines have been flown into Thailand because of the sensitivity of the relations between the United States and the Thai government. However, sources say it would take only a matter of hours to fly Marines to Thailand if such an order is given. Frank Tomlinson, ABC News, the Pentagon.
This is Herbert Kaplow. At its embassy in Washington, the Thai government, through Ambassador Anand Panyarachan, reflected uncertainty this afternoon about what to do if asked to allow those American Marines to be based in Thailand.
I do not know what my government is going to do, but on the basis of the stated policies in the last few months, I doubt whether that will be agreeable to the Thai government.
Even if it becomes clear to most everybody that the American ship was illegally seized?
Well, that is the point that has to be judged by, in the context of international law, and this is a dispute between you and the government of Cambodia. I do not see why or what benefits you would bring to Thailand by getting Thailand involved in the dispute.
As reluctant as the Thais sound, American diplomats note that Thailand, because of its delicate position in Southeast Asia, often says one thing and does another. So the possibility of those Marines going to Thailand is considered a live option, though American officials hope the situation never has to come to that. Herbert Kaplow, ABC News, Washington.
Late, unconfirmed reports say tonight that there is some movement of the Mayaguez or one of the Cambodian gunboats. It's not clear which ship is moving or what the significance of the movement is. There are also reports that 150 Marines are being dispatched from Okinawa to Thailand. The assistant Democratic leader in the Senate, Robert Byrd, said President Ford should set a 48-hour deadline for the release of the Mayaguez. If the deadline is not met, Byrd said, whatever action is necessary, including military force, should be used. Secretary Kissinger is in the Midwest on a speaking tour, and it was this afternoon before reporters were able to ask him what action the U.S. is willing to take. Diplomatic correspondent Ted Koppel has a report.
Not that the Secretary of State was keeping a low profile today, far from it. He was politicking like a congressional candidate whose district is in trouble, pressing the flesh in Jefferson City this morning, then delivering a speech on the world's economic structure in Kansas this afternoon, and only at a news conference, his third in 24 hours, addressing himself to the question of the freighter Mayaguez and reports that it was carrying weapons.
I have not seen the manifest. What I do know is that the highest officials of the government, when they learned of this, were dealing with it as a merchant ship, finding out information from the company to which it belonged, and therefore we are dealing with it as the seizure of an American merchant ship on peaceful trade in international water.
With Mrs. Kissinger sitting among reporters, the Secretary insisted that Congress will be kept advised of the President's intentions, but suggested that congressional approval is not required for the President to take military action.
Well, I didn't say he would pursue them without congressional approval, but he has certain inherent powers to protect American lives and American property. But it would be done in close consultation. Whatever would be considered would be done in close consultation with the Congress.
Kissinger persistently refuses to spell out or rule out military action. America's position has been transmitted through the People's Republic of China, and that position is reliably understood to be an extremely firm one. No compromise, no deals. The United States wants the ship and its personnel back, and there will be no American admissions of error, as in the Pueblo case, to bring about the release. This is Ted Koppel, ABC News, Kansas City.
An American Navy reconnaissance plane was slightly damaged by small arms fire in the Gulf of Thailand today as it flew over a Cambodian government gunboat. No one was hurt. The gunboats are guarding the American merchant ship Mayaguez, which was boarded and seized yesterday in what President Ford says was piracy. Today, Mr. Ford ordered 150 Marines to neighboring Thailand as part of a show of military force, and another 1,000 Marines could be flown there. The Mayaguez, according to information disclosed today, was seized near some rock islands called Pulo Y. Both Cambodia and Vietnam claim ownership of these rocks. It was then escorted to the island of Koh Tang, 30 miles off the Cambodian coast, and it's in that area now. Late today, word came that the ship was moving slowly. Charles Quinn of our staff has been covering this story today at the Pentagon. Here is his report.
For the record, the Pentagon wasn't talking today, but this much we did learn. Government sources said American Marines are on their way to Thailand. 150 Marines are being flown from Okinawa to Thailand. Another 1,000 are standing by, ready to go. The aircraft carrier Coral Sea and other ships, presumably destroyers, are heading toward the Gulf of Siam. From the Philippines, still more American ships, possibly including 2 carriers, are reported moving toward the area. Details of all these movements, precise locations and so forth, are not being disclosed here.
Charles, while we have you, do we have any idea of how the 40 Americans aboard that ship are doing?
Well, the last words, I'm told, the last words from the crew, their last message, was in the course of detailing the boarding. They said shots were fired, but no one was injured. They said they were not in any danger. They did not seem to be in any personal danger, and that they were doing what they were told at that time, in other words, moving in towards Sihanoukville.
Do we know if the crew is still aboard the Mayaguez?
Not long ago, someone here told me that they're not exactly sure where the crew is. They believe maybe some of the crew had been taken off the ship, or others may be below decks, but there, at the moment, is no evidence of the crew above board, above the decks.
Chuck, how did our plane get hit yesterday?
Well, the plane, as you know, is a prop plane. The weather's been very bad there, rainy, low clouds, so the plane had to come down underneath the clouds, wasn't flying very high, and apparently got hit in that respect.
Charles, thank you. Charles Quinn at the Pentagon giving us a briefing. Richard Valeriani, our diplomatic correspondent, reports that the American government still does not know why the Mayaguez was seized. Valeriani has learned that messages have gone to the Cambodians through Peking in China that the American government wants the ship back and won't give the Cambodians anything in exchange for it. Negotiations have been ruled out. At the White House today, the president was spending all his free time on the problem of the ship. Tom Brokaw reports.
Press Secretary Ron Nessen said President Ford would consult with Congress before ordering any military action over the Mayaguez. And so far, according to Nessen, there has been no need for such consultation. The mood at the White House today was described as businesslike, serious but not a crisis atmosphere. President Ford received 5 separate intelligence briefings between 10:30 last night and 8 o'clock this morning. And today he's been spending most of his free time on the incident. However, he did fulfill other commitments. The National Security Council was called into session for more than an hour before noon today. Secretary of State Kissinger did not return from an out-of-town trip for that session, but aides say he has been in constant contact with the president. There was no ready explanation for the apparent intelligence failure in the area where the ship was seized. White House spokesman confirmed that a South Korean freighter was fired on there 10 days ago, no damage, and last week a ship registered out of Panama was detained briefly in the same area. But as Press Secretary Ron Nessen put it, he had no precise answer as to why American ships weren't subsequently warned. Now, an international mariner's warning has been issued for that area. Tom Brokaw, NBC News at the White House.
Good evening. There are reports tonight that the unarmed American merchant ship, which was seized by Cambodian communists yesterday in the Gulf of Thailand, has begun to move. But according to Pentagon sources who reported that movement, it's still unclear where the ship is going or who controls it. This development comes as 150 U.S. Marines were sent to Thailand today, and another 1,000 Marines based on Okinawa were reportedly being readied to follow. But the Thai government said today it would not permit bases in its country to be used for any military assault on Cambodia. Said the Thai Prime Minister, we have enough trouble with our Asian neighbors now. More on the story from Phil Jones at the White House.
The White House has confirmed that a U.S. Navy reconnaissance plane was hit by gunfire while flying over the Cambodian warships holding the Mayaguez. And there is still no official word on the fate of the 40 Mayaguez crewmen. The president met once today with the National Security Council, and while waiting for diplomacy to work, contingency plans have been made for possible military reaction. As one aide put it today, things will become apparent within the next 24 hours. Ships are being moved into the area, and Marines have been readied. Meanwhile, the atmosphere here at the White House remains calm. The president met today with 7 senators and congressmen on other matters, and only one reported a conversation with Mr. Ford on the Mayaguez incident.
He just said when we were ready to leave, he had a tough decision to make with regard to the ship. And I'll trust him to make it right because he makes them from here.
On Capitol Hill, the Senate Majority Whip urged Mr. Ford to issue a deadline for return of the ship and crew.
The United States government, in my judgment, should announce a deadline for the return of the ship, its men, and its cargo. And if the deadline expires and the ship has not been returned, the United States should take whatever action is appropriate and necessary, including military action, to retrieve that ship and its men and its cargo.
According to presidential spokesman Nessen, if Mr. Ford does decide to use military force, he will abide by the War Powers Act and consult Congress in advance. Phil Jones, CBS News at the White House.
Secretary of State Kissinger has been preoccupied with the ship's capture during a 2-day tour of the Midwest. Today, following a speech on international economics, Kissinger provided some indication how the United States plans to handle the crisis.
It has generally been held that the president has inherent powers to protect American lives and American property when they are threatened. And I believe that the president is, and I know the president is operating on this assumption today. Of course, before any steps are taken, we would discuss them with the leaders of the Congress.
And later at a news conference, Kissinger took a hardline approach.
The United States will not accept harassment of its ships on international sea lanes.
Kissinger said the U.S. is relying on diplomacy to secure the release of the ship and crewmen, diplomatic steps he refused to reveal. Chris Kelly, CBS News, Kansas City.
Whenever a minor power cocked a snoot at a major power in the old days, the major powers usually resorted to gunboat diplomacy. In the United States, that was usually preceded by cries of "send in the Marines." Well, the Cambodians still haven't released the United States merchant ship Mayaguez and her crew, and while the Marines haven't been sent into Cambodia, they have been sent right next door, with more on the way. President Ford has ordered Marines into Thailand over the protests of the government of Thailand, which says that 800 Marines have already landed at the U.S. Air Base near Bangkok. More Marines and units of the Pacific Fleet have been placed on the alert, and warships are reported steaming toward the Gulf of Siam, where the American vessel is being detained near an island which is claimed by both Cambodia and Vietnam. For more on the Cambodian affair, here's Barry Serafin in Washington. Barry?
Hughes, for the second time within 12 hours, President Ford last night called a meeting of the National Security Council to discuss what action to take concerning the captured vessel Mayaguez. That meeting stretched past midnight. Phil Jones is at the White House this morning with more on that session. Phil?
Barry, the second National Security Council meeting was convened shortly after Secretary of State Kissinger returned to Washington last night from out-of-town speaking engagements. Those present included President Ford, Vice President Nelson Rockefeller, Secretary Kissinger, Defense Secretary James Schlesinger, the Central Intelligence Director William Colby, and the Acting Director of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General David Jones. As usual in the case of NSC meetings, the agenda was not disclosed to the press, but aides had indicated earlier in the day that contingency plans were being made for possible military reaction in case all the diplomatic efforts failed. The President and his National Security Council, of course, would be supervising any of these contingency plans. The President finally got to bed about 1 o'clock this morning. He was up 4 hours later, but this is not unusual. He is normally up about 5 or 5:30 in the morning, starting his day with exercises and going over the intelligence reports that have been prepared for him by the National Security Council. A White House press official here this morning says there are no intelligence reports indicating any movement of the Mayaguez. It is still anchored about 30 miles off the coast of Cambodia. White House officials continue to turn back all questions about any movement of military forces into that area. And according to the press official here this morning, the White House or the administration has received no official complaint from the government of Thailand over the reported landing of some Marines at the Utapao Air Base there. Barry?
Thank you, Phil. The Pentagon has reiterated that the Mayaguez was not under military charter and was not carrying any military weapons or ammunition. A Pentagon spokesman says about 10% of the ship's cargo was military, but consisted of such items as mail, food, and office equipment.
The United States has begun military action to gain the release of the American merchant ship Mayaguez, now held by Cambodia. When diplomatic efforts to free the ship failed, and it became apparent the Cambodians were about to move the crew members, U.S. planes attacked the gunboats guarding the Mayaguez. At least 3 of the Cambodian boats were destroyed. We have reports detailing the attack and related events, first from Pentagon correspondent Frank Tomlinson.
The attack against the Cambodian boats was carried out at 8:30 last night, our time, by American aircraft flying out of Thailand after there were indications that the Cambodians were trying to move the captive crewmen off the freighter Mayaguez and off Koh Tang Island. 15 hours after the AC-130 gunships and the A-7 fighter bombers made their attack, the Pentagon made a terse announcement saying that 3 Cambodian patrol boats had been sunk. That original announcement also said 4 other Cambodian patrol boats had been damaged and immobilized. Now the Pentagon is backtracking, saying that there's insufficient evidence to prove that those 4 boats were damaged. 1 Cambodian boat did make it to the port of Kampong Song. It was not attacked because it was feared American crewmen were on board. Meanwhile, the Mayaguez is still at anchor off Koh Tang Island, 30 miles off the Cambodian coast, and is under constant surveillance by U.S. aircraft. The first of several naval ships headed for the Gulf of Siam has arrived in the area. It's the destroyer escort Hope. 3 aircraft carriers, the Coral Sea, the Hancock, and the Midway, are in the Western Pacific, apparently headed for the Gulf of Siam. A reinforced Marine Battalion landing team of 1,200 men is in Thailand. It could move at any time the order is given. Officials say there are several options open to the Marines. One of those options is to put Marines on the deck of the freighter Mayaguez. Another is to land Marines on Koh Tang Island. The best bet is to recover the Mayaguez. They'll take both options simultaneously. Frank Tomlinson, ABC News, the Pentagon.
In the quietest of periods, Henry Kissinger probably spends less time at the State Department than any of his predecessors. With a crisis in the works, Kissinger's black limousine and security escort shuttle him even more frequently than usual the few blocks across town to the White House. Within these precincts, Kissinger's primary role is that of head of the National Security Council, a body whose membership includes top officials from the Departments of State and Defense, CIA, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Before the council met late this afternoon, Kissinger stopped to answer and evade a few questions about the sinking of those Cambodian patrol boats and the crew of the Mayaguez.
Do we know how our guys are at this point?
We don't have any detailed information.
Then why did we decide to go ahead and...
Because we didn't want anybody to be transferred from the island to the mainland.
Are you sure that they're on the island right now?
We're going to have a meeting in a little while in which we'll know what we'll know.
If you're stopping traffic, you must have a fairly good idea that the men are either on the island or on the ship.
Well, there's a good chance of that.
The carrier moving in suggests some sort of a landing, doesn't it?
I just don't want to speculate.
There was speculation earlier in the day that some of the crewmen might have been aboard those Cambodian boats that came under attack. White House spokesman Ron Nessen strongly discouraged that theory, but was unable to confirm the safety of the Americans. All indications then are that the crewmen remain on that island off the Cambodian coast. This is Ted Koppel, ABC News, Washington.
Expectancy here at the White House as bipartisan congressional leaders are being briefed by President Ford on the situation involving the captured U.S. merchant ship. There's a strong feeling, backed up by thinly veiled hints from officials, that a decision has been made relating to possible military moves to recover the ship and try to get its crew. However, as Senator John Stennis, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, arrived, he told reporters he did not expect U.S. troops to be sent in. President Ford held a National Security Council meeting just hours before the congressional leaders began arriving. The meeting lasted for several hours, and it is from such NSC sessions that orders are relayed to military commanders in the field. The president is known to feel he has all the legal and congressional authority he needs to use military force against the Cambodians. The White House strategy is clearly to blockade and isolate the tiny offshore island of Koh Tang where the captured ship is being held. Tom Gerald, ABC News at the White House.
It was 11 hours before the Ford administration made public the sinking of those 3 Cambodian ships. Although a few congressmen were notified by the White House last night before the sinking of the Cambodian ships that some such action might be necessary, most congressmen learned of the action only today. The news set off flurries of criticism and demands for clarification, as ABC's Bob Clark reports.
Congressional committees gathered hastily for briefings arranged by the White House. While most congressional leaders had pledged their support of the president in whatever action he felt necessary, the news that 3 Cambodian gunboats had been sunk was greeted with surprise, concern, and some criticism. Senate Majority Leader Mansfield said he hadn't been consulted in advance and had a lot of questions to ask, but most members of Congress still stood behind the president.
I approve of what they've done. We can't be pushed around all over the world. Our legal ships, legal missions, and our men, if we're not going to back them up, we're no longer a nation as I see it.
I think of this operation as sort of like hitting the mule over the head of the two-before to get his attention. And it would be my hope that the Cambodians would realize that the situation is one that we do not intend to tolerate, and that it might be well for them to release the ship and the crew.
We're in a situation where the president, at the very least, has not lived up to the spirit of the War Powers Act of informing the Congress at the earliest possible time. And if the facts are that the planes were engaged in hostilities over Cambodian waters, then I think he's clearly violated the law.
Senate Foreign Relations Committee unanimously approved a resolution supporting the president's power to take military action to recover the American ship. But some members of Congress were clearly moving into position to pounce on the president if the rescue mission fails or costs the lives of any of the crewmen. If the ship and its crew are recovered safely, the criticism will fade away and the president will be a hero on Capitol Hill. Bob Clark, ABC News, Washington.
A Radio Phnom Penh broadcast monitored by United Press International says the U.S. merchant ship Mayaguez will be released. The Cambodian information minister is quoted as saying the ship will be allowed to withdraw from Cambodian waters and warned against further espionage or provocative activities. Repeating, a Radio Phnom Penh broadcast says the U.S. merchant ship Mayaguez will be released. This has been an NBC News special report.
Here from the White House is NBC News correspondent Ford Rowan.
The White House has announced that U.S. Marines have seized the SS Mayaguez in the Gulf of Thailand, but the Cambodians still hold some of the crew members of the vessel. Press Secretary Ron Nessen announced that U.S. Marines were ordered by President Ford to board the ship, which was seized by the Cambodians. After the military operation began, Radio Phnom Penh announced that it was ready to release the SS Mayaguez. Then Press Secretary Nessen came out and announced the following message, which he said was directed to the Cambodian leaders. He said, "We have heard a radio broadcast that you are prepared to release the Mayaguez. We welcome this development if true. As you know, we have seized the ship. As soon as you, the Cambodians, issue a statement that you are prepared to release the crew members you hold unconditionally and immediately, we will promptly cease all military actions." And so, to sum it up, Marines have seized the vessel, the SS Mayaguez, but the Cambodians still hold some of the crew people. Press Secretary Nessen says the Americans will cease their military operations if Phnom Penh will release the American crewmen. This is Ford Rowan, NBC News, the White House.
This has been a special report from NBC News. We return now to our regular programming. Here from the Pentagon in Washington is NBC News correspondent Charles Quinn.
Pentagon spokesman Joseph Layton just held a brief news conference, and he said that apparently about 30 American crewmen of the ship Mayaguez have been rescued.
Shortly after 10:30 p.m. Tonight, Washington time, the destroyer Wilson, which was lying off the island of Koh Tang, reported that a small boat was approaching it with white flags aboard. About 1 minute ago, Secretary Schlesinger advised the President that the boat was alongside of the Wilson and that there were 30 men aboard who were identified as crew members of the Mayaguez. And they are now being taken aboard the destroyer Wilson.
Layton also said that American warplanes from the aircraft carrier Coral Sea have made an airstrike against the Cambodian air base near the port of Kampong Sam. Layton said 135 Marines are now on the island of Koh Tang. More are landing. Still no word on the remaining American crewmen who may have been taken to the Cambodian mainland by the Cambodians. Charles Quinn, NBC News at the Pentagon.
This has been a special report from NBC News.
President Ford is about to address the nation on the latest developments in the capture and the release of the American merchant ship Mayaguez, and it appears that the crisis may be over. About 2 hours ago, a small Cambodian naval vessel flying white flags pulled alongside an American destroyer in the Gulf of Thailand and turned over 30 American crewmen of the Mayaguez, and Pentagon sources said just a few minutes ago that apparently the other 9 crewmen also are safe. This is the latest in the series of startling and sudden developments in this crisis that's happened just over the course of the evening. U.S. Marines stormed aboard the ship earlier today battled their way onto a nearby Cambodian island and bombed a mainland Cambodian air base. About 3 hours after the battle began, a Cambodian vessel waving a white flag surrendered the 30 American crewmen. A Pentagon spokesman said the Cambodian ship approached the American destroyer Wilson and gave up the crewmen. As the surrender was taking place, American fighter bombers were attacking an air base on the mainland of Cambodia, the Pentagon said. Officials said that the Marines battling in Indochina for the first time since and here's the President coming in to tell us what is happening. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
At my direction, United States forces tonight boarded the American merchant ship SS Mayaguez and landed at the island of Koh Tang for the purpose of rescuing the crew and the ship which had been illegally seized by Cambodian forces. They also conducted supporting strikes against nearby military operations or military installations. I have now received information that the vessel has been recovered intact and the entire crew has been rescued. The forces that have successfully accomplished this mission are still under hostile fire, but are preparing to disengage. I wish to express my deep appreciation and that of the entire nation to the units and the men who participated in these operations for their valor and for their sacrifice.
And so there you have it. President Ford, in a very brief announcement, just said that the American ship Mayaguez has been recovered, in his words, intact, and the entire crew of 39 people have been rescued. He said that fighting was still going on in the area, but that U.S. forces are beginning to pull out. So it appears that this crisis is over. No lives have been lost. We understand that in the Marine landing that about 200 Marines went in. We're not quite sure where they came in from yet. And there is one report, not really confirmed, that 2 helicopters went down. Apparently apparently there were some casualties in this engagement. However, as far as the Mayaguez is concerned, the ship is out, apparently underway, intact, as the President said, and all 39 crewmen have been rescued. We have NBC News correspondent Ford Rowan at the White House. I think we'll go to him now and ask him what he has to say, as he's been there all afternoon and all night, and tell us how all of this came about. Ford, are you there?
Yes, Doug. Sources here tell me that there really was no question that military force would be used to try to rescue the ship and the crew when the Cambodians refused to respond to diplomatic efforts to try to secure the release of the men in the ship. We're told that the President really didn't have any options, that he had to move in, and that the decision was made and the operation swung into operation from an early hour. In fact, the first word from Phnom Penh came in a rather unusual way. American Marines had already boarded the ship, when indeed word came from Radio Phnom Penh that the Cambodians would release the ship. Press Secretary Nesson appeared to send a signal to Phnom Penh, and the signal went in a most unusual way, not through the usual diplomatic channels, because that would be too slow. He appeared before cameras and said that if the crew were released safely and immediately, the U.S. would stop all hostile actions. Already they're assessing the repercussions here, and the strategic thinkers within the White House and the National Security Council staff, the repercussions on our nervous ally Thailand, which did not want to be used as a base for this operation, on the underdeveloped nations, which have watched the United States move into a small nation again with hostile fire, on the big powers, which have seen an example of U.S. will, and on the political debate in this country, which will now assess the cost in terms of our casualties against the gains in terms of the release of the entire crew. Douglas?
Thank you, Ford. Charles Quinn is at the Pentagon just now. Charles Quinn, do you have any word about exactly where those helicopters lost and how many American casualties, if any, in this engagement?
No, Doug, I don't have any precise word. Incidentally, we're about to have a briefing here, so I don't know how long I can be with you. There is a strong possibility that two helicopters went down. It's not certain whether they were shot down or whether they crash landed because of engine trouble or whatever. Casualties are expected. We don't know how many or how severe. There was one little humorous detail to all this, if you can believe it, that Joseph Layton, the Pentagon spokesman, told us about earlier. He said that although the ships at the time, the ship, the Mayaguez, at the time was observed to have had people aboard, when the landing party got there, they found none. But in the mess, there were some dishes with, he said, warm food. So apparently, some people made a very, very fast departure from that ship.
Thank you, Charles Quinn. One other note, there were 1,100 Marines sent into Thailand in the middle of this crisis, and they have been removed and placed aboard a United States aircraft carrier which picked them up. Again, the Mayaguez has been recovered, in President Ford's word, intact. The entire crew of 39 has been rescued, all apparently safe and well, and apparently this crisis is over. Douglas Kiker, NBC News, Washington. Good day.
This has been a special report from NBC News.
Apparently made his decision to send in troops to rescue the Mayaguez and her crew at a National Security Council meeting yesterday afternoon, and told congressional leaders about his decision at a White House meeting early last night. The action was announced publicly about 2 hours later, shortly after Marines boarded the Mayaguez. The president received word that the ship's crew was being returned a little after 11 o'clock. Now, word is being awaited on the pullout of Marines from that island of Koh Tang. Ike Pappas is at the Pentagon with more on that. Ike?
Larry, we're standing by here for a briefing that should have begun about 4 o'clock this morning, but at this hour has not yet begun. What the Pentagon is waiting for is word that most, if not all, of the Marines are now off the island and are safely aboard the aircraft carrier Coral Sea. Koh Tang Island sits about 34 miles off the coast of Cambodia from the port of Kampong Som. It is 3 miles long and about a mile wide. Most of it is jungle. The very latest word here is that came about a half hour ago, that the Defense Department sources who told me this said that the Marines had established 2 beachheads on the island. 26 Marines were in one group and about 180 in another. Apparently, the 26 Marines were still under small arms fire from Khmer Rouge communist troops, and landing a helicopter in that area has been difficult. They stressed that the Marines were not pinned down, that they were simply having trouble getting the helicopter in, and that the Marines were answering the communist fire. The other Marines on the other beachhead are said to be under no fire and that they are being removed from the island. The Pentagon expects the operation to end quite shortly. Thus far, we know that only 1 Marine has been confirmed as being killed in action. The report we get is that he stepped on a Claymore mine on the beach. There are at least 8 wounded, 3 of them seriously, and those figures are not final. We must emphasize that. 3 helicopters were either shot down, again, that is 3 helicopters, or they developed mechanical trouble and crash-landed. 2 of them crashed on the island, the other one in the water. There were a few injuries in those crashes, but again, no deaths apparently, and that is the very latest word from the Pentagon. Barry?
Thank you, Ike. At 3:30 this morning, Defense Secretary Schlesinger assessed the military recovery of the Mayaguez.
The successful actions of U.S. forces associated with the recovery of the Mayaguez and its entire crew have a significance far greater than that represented by this unwarranted and illegal hijacking episode. It represents a much-needed and timely reaffirmation of the freedom of the seas and of peaceful transit. Moreover, it represents a firm and measured response to the high-handed and crude use of force. To countenance such an act would have meant the weakening of international order and of civilized communication. This set of operations, so effectively carried out by the U.S. Armed Forces, is an additional tribute to their professional skill.
President Ford last night went through the routine of hosting a White House dinner for Holland's Prime Minister while awaiting word on the rescue mission, and broke into a wide grin when that word finally came. Phil Jones is at the White House now. Phil, what's the situation there?
Barry, all is quiet here at the White House this morning. We last saw the president shortly after midnight when he appeared in the press room to meet with reporters and read a statement announcing that the Mayaguez had been recaptured, that all crew members had been rescued, and that U.S. Armed Forces operating in the area were preparing to disengage. The only thing that has happened here at the White House since then is work on the formal written report that has been sent to Congress detailing the use of U.S. military forces. This report is to comply with the 1973 War Powers Act, which requires notification of the Senate Pro Tem and the Speaker of the House within 48 hours after American forces are introduced into hostilities or the possibility of hostilities. That deadline was about 6:30 Eastern Time this morning. That was 48 hours after U.S. jet fighters had shot in front of the Mayaguez to dissuade it and the Cambodians from moving towards the mainland. Throughout the entire military operation, the only attack on the Cambodian mainland was against an airfield near the port city of Kampong Som. This was done because the U.S. government had intelligence reports that about 2,400 Cambodian armed forces were in that general area. The president and his advisors were afraid that this airfield might be used as a base to attack the U.S. operations. Nesson quoted President Ford as saying, "I just couldn't live with myself if 2,400 Cambodians attacked the Marines."
President Ford went through the motions of hosting a White House dinner last night for Holland's prime minister while awaiting word on the rescue of the Mayaguez, a rescue he was finally able to announce shortly after midnight. Jed Duval retraces the past few days for Mr. Ford.
When, in the middle of the night, President Ford had finished his brief report to the nation on the rescue of the crew, his press aide, Ron Nesson, urged him to sleep well. "I sure will," the president answered. Tuesday night, Mr. Ford had ordered American planes to attack Cambodian gunboats. Wednesday night, he had ordered Marines to recapture the Mayaguez and go find the crew. In each case, he talked it over with a handful of the most important men in Congress, leaders from both parties, both houses. Depending on which of these men you talked to, the president and others at the White House consulted with them, that is, asked their opinions, or simply told them what had been ordered, not seeking advice. As those congressmen left last night's briefing, the Marines were already under fire on the beach at Koh Tang Island. Communications between the two nations were and are virtually non-existent. It was bizarre, confusing, and fearsome. 3 days of where was the crew? As unsettling as this could have been to Mr. Ford personally, through the days and evenings, it was business as usual here. For example, as the translation of the one message from Cambodia was arriving, the president was starting a state dinner honoring the prime minister of the Netherlands. We don't know why the Cambodians stopped the Mayaguez in the first place. We can be fairly certain that the U.S. used muscle when forced to by two factors: the inability to deal diplomatically, simply because there is almost no nation in the area that talks to us, and two, because the first move by Cambodian gunboats brought Mr. Ford to the point where he had to say, fight or not, and he chose to fight.
The rescue of the American ship Mayaguez has been successful. Its 39 crewmen have been returned safely to their ship, and the Marines who landed on Koh Tang Island in the Gulf of Siam to accomplish all this are now off the island and on the carrier Coral Sea. There was heavy fighting. The cost is presently reckoned at 1 Marine, 1 Air Force man killed, some wounded, we don't know how many, and around 14 missing, 8 Marines and 6 Air Force helicopter crewmen. The crew of the Mayaguez suffered no injuries. They were found afloat in a fishing boat with fishermen from Thailand, apparently released by the Cambodians. This is Defense Department film of part of the operation in which a number of helicopters were lost or damaged. There's Koh Tang Island as the Marines headed in toward the beach. It was a tough landing, and for a time the helicopters couldn't land because of heavy Cambodian fire. The Cambodian guns were silenced by American planes, but even so, some of the helicopters were hit. Our correspondent, Charles Quinn, has spent the last few days at the Pentagon covering the Mayaguez story. Here he is now with the story of what happened.
The first American strike came late Tuesday night, Washington time, off the island of Koh Tang against the Cambodian gunboats which had seized the Mayaguez. The Americans said they did it to stop plans for moving the captured American seamen to the mainland. 3 gunboats were destroyed. 21 hours later, President Ford ordered the rescue of the Mayaguez and its crew. Marines flying by helicopter from Thailand landed on the destroyer Holt, then boarded the Mayaguez. No one was aboard, but in the ship's mess, the Marines found warm food and hot tea. At the same time, more Marines and helicopters invaded the island of Koh Tang. The first chopper moving in was shot down about 100 feet offshore. 5 minutes later, a second chopper came in and was hit. It crash-landed on the beach. The Marines got out and took cover. A third helicopter was also knocked down on the beach. More choppers came, the Marines swarmed out, the fight was on. Just before 11 o'clock last night, an airstrike was ordered from the carrier Coral Sea against Ream Air Base on the mainland, near the port of Kampong Som. At about the same time, the destroyer Wilson, also lying off the island of Koh Tang, reported a small fishing boat approaching from the direction of the mainland under a white flag. Minutes later, the crew of the Mayaguez scrambled aboard the destroyer. The Americans were safe. Fighting on Koh Tang continued. Resistance was stiff, at times heavy. Half the helicopter force was now out of action, 3 destroyed, 2 disabled, so the Marines decided to wait for the Coral Sea, still more than 6 hours away by helicopter. While the fighting was still going on, Defense Secretary Schlesinger explained the reason for the action.
It represents a much-needed and timely reaffirmation of the freedom of the seas and of peaceful transit. Moreover, it represents a firm and measured response to the hide-handed and crude use of force. To countenance such an act would have meant the weakening of international order and of civilized communication.
The Marines withdrew by chopper and small boats, sometimes under heavy hostile fire. A number of helicopters were driven off. Finally, it was over. Pentagon spokesman Joseph Layton announced the end.
At 9:10 a.m. EDT, Washington time, the last helicopter brought out a number of Marines and helicopter crewmen, which it is believed are the last of the security ground force on the island.
The number of American casualties is still not clear. Reports are conflicting and incomplete. The best estimates now are 2 dead, about a dozen wounded, 14 missing. Much earlier today, Schlesinger said the price paid was significant but small, he said, in relation to the contribution to this nation and the civilized world. Charles Quinn, NBC News, Washington.
The White House, in commenting on a Cambodian radio offer to give up the ship, indicated that because of the nature of the transmission, it wasn't sure the offer was the real thing, and that soon after that, the attack in any case was underway. But there was general jubilation at the White House. Tom Brokaw has the story of the president's involvement.
President Ford made the decision to go ahead with the military operation during a National Security Council meeting late yesterday afternoon. A White House official said the president moved when he did because there had been no response from Cambodia in 3 days. Nearly 2 hours after the president's order was issued, congressional leaders were called to the White House for a briefing on the situation. They were not asked for opinions, they were told what was going on. While the operation was underway, President Ford had to attend a White House dinner for the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. But once that was over, he once again turned all of his attention to the Mayaguez. It was about this time that the crewmen were released. In the Oval Office, jubilation when word came that the crewmen were safe, followed by an order to wrap up the rescue. About 12:30 this morning, a more somber President Ford, now in a business suit, went on television to make a statement.
At my direction, United States forces tonight boarded the American merchant ship SS Mayaguez and landed at the island of Koh Tang for the purpose of rescuing the crew and the ship which had been illegally seized by Cambodian forces. They also conducted supporting strikes against nearby military operations or military installations. I have now received information that the vessel has been recovered intact and the entire crew has been rescued. The forces that have successfully accomplished this mission are still under hostile fire, but are preparing to disengage.
Shortly after the last Marines fought their way off Koh Tang Island, the president was on the south lawn of the White House to welcome the Shah of Iran here on a state visit. Mr. Ford didn't refer to the Mayaguez directly, but he did say the United States remains committed to world peace. At noon today, he met with the ranking members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and they praised the president's actions, including his contacts with Congress.
I've always felt that if we were fully advised as to what was taking place, what the plan and so forth, as far as I'm concerned, that's adequate consultation. But frankly, there are those who feel that there ought to be consultation ahead of time.
Although there still are unanswered questions about the president's decision-making process and the military operation, public response here at the White House has been overwhelmingly favorable. Calls and letters are running about 10-to-1 in support of Mr. Ford. By that standard, at least, this is one of the most popular decisions this president has made. Tom Brokaw, NBC News at the White House.
There is other evidence of public support for the Mayaguez operation. A national poll conducted by NBC News this week shows support for military action from about 2 out of every 3 people polled. President Ford notified Congress early today in a letter of the military action he had ordered to rescue the Mayaguez and its crew. That was in conformance with the War Powers Act of 2 years ago, which requires the president to make such a report within 48 hours of the time the action is taken. However, in a single sentence at the end of the letter, he said he took the action pursuant to constitutional authority, making no mention of the War Powers Act. Catherine Mackin has more on that and on congressional reaction.
The letter was a brief summary of the Cambodian incident with a concluding paragraph that said the president ordered the operation under his authority as commander-in-chief. Senate Leader Mike Mansfield said there was nothing new in it, but the president had lived up to the War Powers Act in reporting to Congress. There was more criticism in Congress today than earlier of all the military power President Ford used, although some refused to go on the record with their criticism. But most in Congress strongly supported the president. Here is a sample of opinion on both sides.
And had he not done what he did, every little, as I say, half-assed nation in the world would be taking shots at us. And I think now they're going to think twice before they try it.
But I give him high marks in that he did, in the end, restrain the use of force in the operation.
Maybe they believe that this is the way that a superpower has to prove its virility and its credibility, but I think it's more a sign of weakness than strength to respond in this way to an incident that was relatively minor.
I sense in the Congress and in the administration in recent weeks a great deal of frustration because of the way Vietnam ended, and I think there probably was something of a reflex to want to prove that we were tough, prove that we were willing to act decisively and perhaps take military action.
You'd think that the Cambodians had landed in San Diego, the way the president reacted to this.
The general view in Congress, even before the mail starts coming in, is that the president's conduct in this incident will be overwhelmingly politically popular in the country. When the costs are known, both in dollars and in manpower, the feeling is this could change somewhat, but in the short term, the Cambodian incident stands to be a political plus for Mr. Ford. Catherine Mackin, NBC News, Washington.
In the Gulf of Thailand, and it appears the losses may be much higher than first thought. Ike Pappas has the story from Washington.
The preliminary casualty list shows 1 Marine killed in action, 22 Marines and Air Force men wounded, and 13 still missing, a total of 36. 3 helicopters were shot down, 1 over land and 2 over sea, as they tried to land on Tang Island. The first crashed 100 feet offshore. The 26 men aboard were rescued. The second was badly damaged by ground fire. The pilot attempted to fly to the northwest, hoping to make it back to Thailand. But 5 miles out, it burst into flames and crashed. The destroyer Wilson picked up 13 of the 26 men aboard, but 13 others cannot be found. The Pentagon was asked if there is any hope for the missing men.
It's very difficult to say. I wouldn't speculate on that. I wouldn't want to indicate any great hope, but there are no indications that anyone was left on the island.
The Pentagon also released 2 aerial photos showing the Mayaguez side by side with the destroyer Holt during the Marine boarding early in the action, and the Holt towing the Mayaguez to the open sea later on. The American attack was heavier than at first believed. At one point, a giant 15,000-pound bomb called the Big Blue 82 was dropped on the island by an AC-130 as Marines came under fierce enemy fire. American aircraft also struck at petroleum storage areas in the mainland. That attack came well after the Mayaguez crew was released, but Pentagon sources said the action was necessary to protect Marines fighting their way off the island. Ike Pappas, CBS News, Washington.
President Ford said today, now that the rescue operation of the Mayaguez and its crew is over, he is sleeping easier. Secretary of State Kissinger also is pleased by the results, and he expressed his pleasure at a Washington news conference today. Marvin Kalb reports.
Kissinger thinks the Mayaguez episode proves that the U.S. can act decisively. In private, he talks about how it has helped to restore confidence in government, especially after Watergate and the fall of Indochina. In public, he's more modest, denying he is trying to build it into an apocalyptic event. Still, his message came through loud and clear.
The impact ought to be to make clear that there are limits beyond which the United States cannot be pushed, and that the United States is prepared to defend those interests, and that it can get public support and congressional support for those actions. But we are not going around looking for opportunities to prove our manhood.
Kissinger also focused on America's problems with Thailand, growing out of the fact that the U.S. sent Marines there without first telling the Thais, thus embarrassing them at a very difficult moment. The Secretary struck a note of conciliation and regret.
We are prepared to discuss in a spirit of friendship and cooperation all the concerns that the Thai government has, and we do regret any embarrassment we may have caused.
The Thai ambassador is protesting nevertheless. He has been recalled to Bangkok as a sign of his government's displeasure. He explained the main point of the protest.
I think the nature of our protest is first to defend the sovereignty of Thailand. It is a ticklish point. We felt that our sovereignty has been abused. The very fact that U.S. Marines were landed at a Thai base without our permission does cause my government to make or to take a certain position in protesting this particular incident.
Thailand does not seem to be one of Kissinger's major concerns. At the moment, he is still basking in the afterglow of a successful, if costly, military operation. He doesn't seem to be bothered by apparent inconsistencies in his presentation. His claim on the one hand, for example, that the U.S. waited 60 hours before moving militarily, but his admission on the other hand that the U.S. actually began moving within 24 hours, then gradually intensified the military pressure. Marvin Kalb, CBS News, the State Department.
Thailand is still smarting over the use of its territory as a launching pad for the American operation to free the freighter Mayaguez. And today, Prime Minister Kukrit Pramod called a news conference to charge that the U.S. had infringed on his country's sovereignty.
Well, I personally consider the American action in this case a violation of Thai sovereignty, and in contradiction with the agreement that we have with the United States.
The Prime Minister said the U.S. had ignored his request not to get Thailand involved in the dispute by landing American Marines on Thai territory.
Well, I made the protest and demanded that the Marines be withdrawn immediately. The Marines were not withdrawn immediately, and apparently our protests were not attended to, or no notice was taken of our protest.
Prime Minister Kukrit said the American presence in Thailand is now compromising his country. And as the Prime Minister was setting the stage for a stepped-up U.S. withdrawal from Thailand, his government was welcoming a recent American adversary. A three-man delegation from the new communist government of South Vietnam arrived at Bangkok Airport to an enthusiastic greeting from Vietnamese who have been living for years as war refugees in northeast Thailand. The Vietnamese lost no time in reminding the Thais that they were coming as representatives of a victorious government.
Our only wish is to extend to you the greetings of friendships of the Vietnamese people who have just won the victory.
The communist delegation demanded the return of American aircraft flown to Thailand by fleeing South Vietnamese pilots. And with that, the communists drove off in a limousine amid cheers and flowers to claim the South Vietnamese embassy set up in Bangkok by the defeated Thieu regime. Peter Collins, CBS News, Bangkok.
White House News Secretary said today that President Ford regrets the casualties involved in rescuing the Mayaguez and plans to express his sympathy to families. Mr. Ford himself, at a meeting with a Republican group today, had this to say about the ship incident.
Regardless of our ethnic background of this great country, a country that we can be so proud of, and especially proud because of what was done by our military in the last 48 hours.
Although the president may be rejecting any suggestions that he welcomed this incident for international diplomatic purposes, one of those involved in a 76 Ford presidential campaign told CBS News today that the entire incident and the president's handling of it had significantly improved Mr. Ford's chances for election next year. Phil Jones, CBS News at the White House.
Radio Phnom Penh, the Cambodian government says it was defending itself when those gunboats seized the Mayaguez last Monday. The statement claims the American ship was on a spy mission, which the Cambodians described as just one example of American attempts at, quote, bullying the peoples of small countries who refuse to bow to their will. In the general vicinity of where the Mayaguez was seized came to light today. Reports reaching Stockholm say a gunboat believed to be Cambodian shot at a Swedish freighter 2 days ago as it was going from Singapore to Bangkok. The ship escaped damage by evasive maneuvers.
Mayaguez arrived in Singapore today, and at an emotional news conference, the captain of the American freighter thanked Marines and Air Force pilots for saving him and his men. The skipper, Charles Miller, also disclosed that the crew was released after he promised their Cambodian captors that he would urge the United States to end airstrikes that were part of the rescue operation. Jack Perkins has a report from Singapore.
Tying up at the dock in Singapore, a welcome port of call for the SS Mayaguez. A ship whose name says she carries no guns, has no spy equipment, and was not sponsored. Yet the canoe news seized her. It was 3 days before the men of the Mayaguez could reboard her and complete their voyage to here. The chairman of the shipping company flew out from the States to greet them. Almost unanimously, the captain and men expressed gratitude for the American Armed Forces and President Ford.
I am proud of our armed forces. If it hadn't been for our jet fighters and our Marines landing in the beaches, I don't think this crew would be here today. I don't think that the crew would be alive. We'd either be in a prison camp in Phnom Penh or we'd be all shot to death. So whatever the general public in the United States feel, I don't know. I haven't seen any papers, haven't heard any news, but it was only through the efforts of President Ford, the Air Force, the Navy, and the Marine Corps that finally secured our release.
He negotiated their release finally by convincing the Cambodians the ship carried no arms, and more important, by convincing them that only if they let his men go would the American planes stop bombing. The 3 days as captives, as unwitting objects of the international mini-war, left the men of the Mayaguez with a hold full of stories, impressions.
When we were taking Bill, and the fishing boat we were on came alongside the pier. There were 2 communist Chinese ships in there, and we were put alongside the pier, and there was approximately 200-300 people there with guns, and just I felt very dejected, very uncertain of the future.
Was that the lowest time you mentioned?
Yes, for me, yes, it was. Even being attacked by our own airplanes and being bombed and gassed and shelled, that was very, very depressing.
After all of this, they've given the men a choice. About half of them say they've had enough and they will fly back to the United States. The other half say it can't happen again. They'll stay with the Mayaguez as it heads back out to sea. Jack Perkins, NBC News, Singapore.
Some of the Mayaguez crewmen were injured by American shrapnel as they were being transported to the Cambodian mainland by Cambodian ships. Cambodia today charged the United States invaded Tang Island and attacked the Cambodian mainland after the Mayaguez crew was released. In a radio broadcast from Phnom Penh, Cambodian spokesman also denied that the Ford administration tried to use diplomacy to save the Mayaguez. In Washington, administration spokesman said the Cambodian mainland was attacked in an effort to help American Marines still pinned down on Tang Island after the Mayaguez crew was released. And today, Defense Secretary Schlesinger said there was no unusual delay in withdrawing the Marines after that crew was released. Marched through the streets of Bangkok, demonstrating against the United States for using their country as a base in the Mayaguez rescue. They ripped the eagle emblem from the United States Embassy gates and hanged Uncle Sam in effigy. All of this follows a Thai government demand for an apology from the American government. George Lewis has more on the story in Bangkok in this satellite report.
The first group of demonstrators arrived at the embassy in the mid-afternoon. They demanded that the U.S. apologize for sending Marines to Thailand without the permission of the Thai government. They said Henry Kissinger's statement of regret for embarrassing the Thais was insufficient. Meanwhile, other demonstrators were marching toward the embassy from Bangkok's Thammasat University. The demonstration gathered momentum as it moved toward the embassy. Bystanders joined in, and some estimates put the size of the crowd at 10,000. Police didn't do anything to stop the crowd. Government officials favored this display of anti-Americanism. At the embassy, the marchers filled the entire block in front of the U.S. compound. They brought a huge effigy of Uncle Sam, which they put up at the front gate. Some demonstrators ripped the eagle off the U.S. seal in front of the embassy. Again, nobody tried to stop them. Finally, a few of the demonstrators broke open the gate and threatened to storm inside the compound. But the student leaders quickly calmed them down and urged everyone to maintain order. They said they didn't want any violence.
More than 8 hours later, 3,000 demonstrators remained camped out in front of the embassy. They vowed to remain here until the U.S. apologizes to Thailand. But there was no sign the embassy was getting ready to do that. George Lewis, NBC News, Bangkok.
Now, the United States has seized a communist ship off the coast of Northern California. A Polish fishing vessel with a crew of 70 was picked up by the United States Coast Guard for allegedly violating territorial limits off San Francisco. And Fred Briggs has this report.
The Kalmar, a 278-foot Polish fishing ship, was seized about 3 o'clock this morning Pacific time, 10 miles off the California coast near Monterey. That's 2 miles within the 12-mile limit. The Coast Guard cutter Modoc warned the Kalmar it was too close. The warning was reportedly ignored, and the Modoc moved in. Coast Guardsmen boarded the Kalmar, and it was escorted under guard to San Francisco. It was believed to be the first time a communist fishing trawler had been seized off the west coast of the lower 48 states. There have been seizures of Soviet trawlers off the Alaskan coast. The Kalmar was escorted to Pier 9 in San Francisco, a Coast Guard pier, and a popular spot for artists, who today got a bit of history along with their seascapes. A Coast Guard spokesman, obviously proud, noted that today is Armed Forces Day, and people are really seeing the Coast Guard in action. The captain of the Kalmar is said to have blamed it all on faulty radar equipment, and according to a local harbor pilot who boarded the ship, the captain's main worry isn't the authorities here, but what his employers in Poland will think about this.
He said that he's afraid he might lose his job on account of it. Which he probably will. He's inside the 12-mile limit.
It's uncertain how long the captain, crew, and ship will be here. It's out of the hands of the Coast Guard now and in the hands of the Justice Department and the State Department. Fred Briggs, NBC News, San Francisco.
The new Cambodian government today gave its version of the Mayaguez affair. Spokesman said the U.S. Marine landing on Koh Tang Island began 3.5 hours after a broadcast announcement of the official Cambodian position. a position that the Cambodians indicate included an inclination to release the crew. And the Cambodians claim the Marine strike came even after the crew was actually released. White House spokesman put the time of that Marine assault almost 3 hours earlier than the Cambodians. The Cambodian government flatly claims that while the bombing was going on, the Ford administration was, quote, lying about diplomatic efforts. The Cambodians imply that they seized the ship because they believed it to be on a spying mission.
Marine assault that was supposed to rescue the crew of the Mayaguez cost a good deal more than we thought up to now. The Pentagon has been saying that 1 Marine was killed, 13 servicemen missing, and 22 were wounded. But today, Defense Secretary James Schlesinger said there were more.
The numbers are a little bit higher than was initially released. As a result of the reassessment of the MIAs, the wounded, and the KIAs, I think that the current indication is something like 3 Marines and 2 airmen were killed.
In other words, 5. A total of 5 men.
But once again, we have to be very careful. This is a complex operation, but that is the general indication.
Is there any change in the number of those unaccounted for? Is that still 13?
I think that that's 16 MIAs.
And the number wounded?
The number wounded is between 70 and 80, I do not recall. This includes all sorts of minor wounds. I think that number is essentially intact.
Schlesinger said Captain Charles Miller of the Mayaguez was in error when he said he saw 7 bodies on ice on a U.S. destroyer. Schlesinger saying the 7 were probably just wounded. UPI Pentagon saying that some Marines may have been left behind on Tong Island. In Singapore, Captain Miller and some of his men said today that the Marines attacked the wrong island, that the crew was on Rong Son Lem, an island some 25 miles from Tong, the island which the Marines landed on. Captain Miller figures that the Marines were not told because they were coming from Subic Bay in the Philippines and the surveillance planes were from somewhere else, that they weren't in touch with each other.
Major General who commanded the assault on Cambodia's Tang Island in the Mayaguez incident hailed the operation today as a success in spite of heavy casualties. At the risk of sounding like a warmonger, said Major General Kenneth Houghton, I would describe it as an elixir for morale. The Pentagon today released the names of 3 of the Americans killed in action in the Mayaguez fight. Those listed were Air Force Second Lieutenant Richard Vandergeer of Buckland, Massachusetts, Air Force Staff Sergeant Elwood Rumbaugh of Dothan, Alabama, and Lance Corporal Aston Loney of Albany, New York. Today, the Pentagon said its toll from the incident for the time being, in its words, is 5 dead, 16 missing, and 49 wounded. But it will have what was called a preliminary final count tomorrow. Meanwhile, the White House indicated that President Ford is not happy with the way the Pentagon has been handling those casualty figures. ABC White House correspondent Tom Jarrow reports.
The commander-in-chief is said to be frustrated. A military that can fire from a speeding jet fighter with precision 15 feet in front of a moving Cambodian patrol boat can't seem to account for its troops. The president, like the press, is asking for the final casualty figures, but not getting anything more than revised, tentative, incomplete ones. The delay prompted questions from reporters about a possible cover-up. White House News Secretary Ron Nessen says they aren't trying to hide the casualties or attempting to conceal the bad news. Nessen also continues to defend the heavy use of military strikes ordered by the president, described among advisors as equivalency plus. It was not overkill to bomb Cambodian oil facilities after the ship and its crew were released, according to the president's spokesman, because the Cambodian ships and planes might have used that fuel in a counterattack. As far as Marines landing on the wrong island, the president's spokesman says hindsight is always 20/20. After spurring the military to complete their casualty count, the president today turned to another problem, the resettling of the tens of thousands of Vietnamese refugees. He signed an order establishing a 17-member advisory commission to work toward integrating the Vietnamese into American life. Tom Gerald, ABC News at the White House.
Sent a note to Thailand expressing regret over the use of Thailand-based Marines in the Mayaguez rescue. The note was taken as a formal apology by Thailand, thus easing the diplomatic crisis between Washington and Bangkok.
Today is somewhat puzzled about the delays in the final casualty count in the Mayaguez rescue operation, but the White House also said there has been no attempt to hide any bad news. At the Pentagon, a spokesman said getting accurate figures isn't easy.
And there was a sharp drop in today's estimate of wounded men, which yesterday was 70 or 80. Today, the Pentagon listed only 49 as seriously wounded. Others had injuries such as broken ankles or bruises. Here's the latest on the casualties from Charles Quinn at the Pentagon.
The Pentagon announced today the latest casualty figures: 5 dead, 16 missing, 49 wounded. These figures have changed several times since Wednesday, the day of the attack. Each time the Pentagon cautioned that the figures were incomplete, subject to change. The total is much higher now than first reported. At a briefing today, reporters asked Pentagon spokesman Joseph Layton why it's taking so long to get a final casualty list.
I don't think that there's been any undue delay. We have tried to get you the casualty list just as fast as was humanly possible once the smoke of battle cleared away. All I can tell you is that we have done our utmost, we have held back nothing.
Layton said the figures came slowly because troops were spread out over several ships, that getting an accurate picture is complicated. But many people here at the Pentagon aren't buying that. They say they are puzzled. They say they simply don't understand what's taking so long. Even today's figures are not final. Those are expected tomorrow. Charles Quinn, NBC News at the Pentagon.
Of the 16 missing men, the White House said today that there are no indications any of them was taken prisoner. And the names of 3 of the 5 men killed were released today. Second Lieutenant Richard Vandegeer of Buckland, Massachusetts of the Air Force. Air Force Staff Sergeant Elwood E. Rumbaugh of Dothan, Alabama. And Marine Lance Corporal Ashton N. Loney of Albany, New York. In the meantime, some of the dead men's comrades were telling some of the story of the Mayaguez operation to the press. Lou Allison has that story from the Philippines.
A Marine general and the colonel in charge of the beach landing itself described the fighting for reporters, but they refused to answer questions on why that particular island was attacked or why the bombing of the mainland continued after the civilian crewmen were released.
The officers brought 2 wounded Marines with them to the news conference. They confirmed the new, higher casualty figures and said there was little hope that any of the 13 missing men might be alive. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Randall Austin of Glenside, Pennsylvania, said his men met heavier resistance than he'd expected, but said they'd killed about 25 of the enemy.
Well, it was certainly very heavy combat. It was a rather classic heliborne assault, I think, in which, unfortunately, we encountered very heavy fire from the ground. Indeed, it was very, very much close combat. I have several reports from my officers and men that were on the ground that there were many instances where the enemy had, in fact, thrown hand grenades in at our people and they had picked them up and thrown them back.
The colonel said he thought most of the American casualties occurred in helicopter crashes. Sergeant Victor Salinas of Corpus Christi, Texas, and Corporal R.J. Hughes of Louisville, Kentucky, were both burned when their helicopter was hit and exploded.
It was just a big ball of fire. The pilot managed to put the bird down. After we got down, most of the people started getting out of there because it was just a big ball of flame. And inside the helicopter was all pitch black smoke.
After the news conference, Hughes and Salinas were awarded their Purple Heart medals. Other wounded Marines and the rest of the attack force are due to arrive here soon aboard the carrier Coral Sea. Lou Allison, NBC News, Subic Bay, the Philippines.
After the American invasion of Tang Island to rescue the freighter Mayaguez, the United States still does not know how many men it lost. The Pentagon said today it will have a preliminary final count by tomorrow. The White House promises it will not hide any bad news. Ike Pappas brings us up to date now on the Pentagon's latest casualty figures.
The Pentagon has revised downward to 49 the number of wounded in the Mayaguez recovery. There has been confusion over the number of casualties. Immediately after the battle, the Pentagon listed 1 dead and 8 wounded. The next day, 13 missing were added, and the wounded figure went to 22. Yesterday, Defense Secretary Schlesinger revealed 5 were killed, 16 missing, and between 70 and 80 wounded. Today, the Pentagon cut the wounded figure back to 49, explaining Schlesinger was counting even slight injuries, such as sprained ankles. Of the 16 missing, 13 are believed to have been aboard a helicopter that crashed at sea. The Pentagon does not hold out much hope that they're alive. 3 of the 5 confirmed dead were identified today. They are Air Force Second Lieutenant Richard Vandergeer of Buckland, Massachusetts, Air Force Staff Sergeant Elwood Rumbog of Dothan, Alabama, and Marine Lance Corporal Ashton Loney of Albany, New York. President Ford and others have been concerned over the Pentagon's slowness regarding the number of casualties. Charges have been raised that the Pentagon was attempting to make the operation appear better than it really was in terms of losses. Spokesman Joseph Layton denied the charges.
I don't think that there's been any undue delay. We have tried to get you the casualty list just as fast as was humanly possible once the smoke of battle cleared away. All I can tell you is that we have done our utmost and we have held back nothing.
Layton confirmed none of the bodies of the 5 dead Americans has been recovered. The body of at least 1 Marine killed in action was left behind on Tang Island because of heavy enemy gunfire during the nighttime withdrawal.
It was the second time in the past month that American Marines have failed to return with their dead. The 2 American Marines killed in the attack on Ton Son Nhut Airport in the final hours just before the American evacuation of Saigon were also left behind. The State Department is attempting to recover American dead from Saigon and from Tang Island. Ike Pappas, CBS News, the Pentagon.
At Subic Bay, the U.S. naval base in the Philippines, the commander of the Marine Assault Force on Tang Island recounted today what happened. Keith Kay reports.
The press conference was limited in scope. Only the direct involvement of the Marine Corps was discussed. On hand was the commanding officer of the Marine Security Force, who described the battle on Koh Tang Island.
Every helicopter that came in received heavy small arms and machine gun fire. And the enemy troops that had moved in very close to ours in our perimeter were bringing a very high volume of fire on our troops. It was being returned, and there was considerable exchange of hand grenades along the line at that period of time.
In all, about 210 Marines were involved in the operation on Koh Tang Island. 2 of the wounded Marines were at the press conference. They never made it to the island. Their helicopter was shot down just yards from the beach as they flew in on the initial assault.
When the helicopter caught flame, it was just a big ball of fire. The pilot managed to put the bird down. Anyway, after I made my way out to the window, I could see most of the bodies, not bodies, but most of the Marines already swimming out towards the sea, sir. We got so spread out to a point that for a while I thought I was the only one out there. I understand, well, myself, I know I was out in the sea swimming for about 3.5 hours when we made our way up to the destroyer. Afterward, we learned that there were 13 Marines altogether that got picked up and were safely on board.
These young Marines were just, they're training and they want to get out and do their job. At the risk of sounding like a warmonger, I think it has an elixir on the morale.
After the press conference, the commanding general of the 3rd Marine Division, Major General Kenneth J. Houghton, pinned Purple Hearts on the 2 wounded enlisted men. Keith Kay, CBS News, Subic Bay, Philippines.
Its 5th set of figures on American casualties from last Wednesday's invasion of Tang Island. The spokesman said these figures are as close to final as possible, except perhaps for some minor adjustments. Ike Pappas has the story in Washington.
15 Americans have been confirmed killed in action. Another 50 wounded, 2 of them seriously, and 3 are still officially listed as missing. Of the dead, 11 were Marines, 2 were Navy men, and 2 Air Force. The bulk of the deaths came when a helicopter carrying 26 men, most of them Marines, attempted to land on Tang Island and was shot down 100 feet offshore. 13 of those aboard were rescued. The other 13 died. The Pentagon holds out little hope for those still listed as missing.
The 3 Marines who are still counted as missing in action were among the Marines fighting on the island and were not accounted for when the muster in various places was completed. But all the eyewitness reports so far indicate that no American fighting men were left alive on the beach.
None of the bodies of the dead Americans was brought home. Diplomatic efforts are continuing to recover the bodies of those who may have been killed on Tang Island. The Pentagon has no plans to resume the search effort for those lost at sea.
Ike Pappas, CBS News, the Pentagon.
The official death toll from the Mayaguez rescue operation has been a matter of dispute and controversy ever since the first figures were announced. Today, a new element was added to the picture. ABC White House correspondent Tom Jarrow reports.
The night of the Mayaguez rescue, White House News Secretary Ron Nussin, after much badgering by reporters, reluctantly said there was one unconfirmed death. The next day, the Pentagon reported possibly 3 killed. By weekend, Defense Secretary Schlesinger said the current indication was 5 deaths. Yesterday, the Pentagon released its tentative final figures, giving 15 dead as considered accurate. Today, American officials said 23 Air Force security men killed in Thailand when their helicopter crashed were being moved as part of the contingency rescue plan. Their deaths bring to 38 the number of American lives lost in the overall rescue picture. White House officials said they were not listed in the official casualty count because they were not involved in the actual rescue. The president's spokesman also said Mr. Ford was saddened by the loss of life. He equated the deaths of those of policemen who run risk to save lives and protect property. The entire episode is being widely viewed as a political bonus. 7 Republican senators up for re-election next year saw the president today, and afterwards Senator Scott was asked about the impact of the rescue.
It was felt that it had been a very definite plus because really it was in the best tradition of strong presidents exercising leadership in times of crisis, and therefore it could only help.
Later, 20 major city Republicans